Amy Roloff was 54 years old and had no idea what she was doing. That is not an insult. It is close to a direct quote. Speaking to TLC UK in May of 2017, she described phoning her girlfriends and asking them what dating even is. 29 years of marriage to Matt sat behind her. She had never had a dating profile. She had not been single since her 20s, when the rules were completely different and none of this happened on a phone. Her divorce had been finalized on May 5, 2016. By that autumn, 6 months out, she decided to try. The event was called Paint and Sip. Portland area, wine, canvases, and a room of single adults paired off to work on paintings together. As a format, it is smarter than it sounds. The problem with meeting people in a bar at 54 is that a bar gives you nothing to do except talk, and talking to a stranger with no shared task is exhausting for anyone past about 30. Put a canvas between two people and the conversation happens sideways, in the gaps, while their hands are busy. Nobody has to perform. Amy arrived nervous. She said so at the time, to the other attendees, without dressing it up. Adventure was something she was teaching herself. Single life frightened her. Vulnerability was a project. That habit of naming her own emotional state out loud, in a room of strangers at a painting class, is worth noticing. It is the same thing she does on camera and the same thing she does in her writing, and it is arguably her most consistent trait. The organizers sat her down beside a man named Bob. Bob, not Chris. This detail gets lost in every retelling, and it should not, because it is the most human part of the evening. Amy's actual assigned partner that night was somebody else entirely. They painted, they chatted, nothing happened. No spark, no follow-up, no second thought. Somewhere else in that room was Chris Marek, 54, the same age as Amy, single, never married, a realtor from West Lynn who had come out for his own reasons. At some point in the evening, they ended up talking. What was actually said has never been documented, and both of them have left it alone, which is probably correct. First conversations rarely survive being quoted. Whatever it was, it worked. Before the night ended, Chris asked her a question, and the question is more revealing than any transcript would have been. He did not ask her to dinner. He did not ask for her number and suggest coffee, which is the standard, low-commitment, easily canceled opening move. He asked whether she fancied coming out on the back of his bike sometime. Consider what that invitation actually contains. Dinner is neutral ground. A motorcycle is his ground, his hobby, his machine, his weekend. He was not proposing a low-stakes test. He was offering her direct access to the thing he did with his own time, on the first night, before he knew anything about her. It was also, quietly, a compatibility test that dinner could never be. Some people say yes to a motorcycle and some people do not, and the answer tells you a great deal. Amy said yes. Her answer was not nothing either. A woman with achondroplasia getting onto the back of a motorcycle is making a calculation an average height passenger never has to make. Reach to the foot pegs. Grip on a bike built to standard proportions. Total dependence on the person in front for balance and stability at highway speed. She said yes to that on a first date, having never done it before, at 54. Everything anyone needs to know about how Amy Roloff approaches risk is contained in that decision. So her first date after a 29-year marriage was not a restaurant. It was the back of a bike, somewhere in Oregon, late in 2016 or very early in 2017. She had never been a motorcycle passenger in her life. She loved it. He drove carefully, she felt safe, and she wanted to go again. Something she had spent 29 years never once doing turned out, at 54, to be a thing she enjoyed. There is one more thing hidden in that first evening, and it only becomes visible in hindsight. Amy had spent nearly 30 years inside a marriage that was, in a very literal sense, a shared enterprise, a farm, a television production, 4 children, a brand. Every part of her adult life had been co-owned, co-managed, and increasingly co-negotiated. Chris arrived with none of that. No shared property, no joint business, no children between them, nothing either of them had to run together. He was offering her a relationship that was only a relationship. For a woman coming out of what she had just come out of, that may have been the most attractive feature of the whole arrangement, and neither of them would have been able to name it at a painting class. Through the first half of 2017, they built slowly. More rides, meals, conversation. the unglamorous accumulation of ordinary time that is how adults actually get to know each other. Neither of them pushed. Both had reasons not to. Amy was still working through the end of a marriage that had occupied her entire adult life, and the fact that the divorce was legally finished did not mean the emotional part was. Chris had spent decades comfortably single, with a house he answered to nobody about and a schedule that belonged entirely to him. Being in something serious required adjustment on his side too, and that gets under-discussed because the story is usually told as Amy's recovery. There was also the matter of her children, all four of them adults with opinions, and her ex-husband, who was not going anywhere and who owned the ground she was living on. Any relationship Amy entered was going to have an audience of people with a stake in it. Nothing about that situation rewards speed. A woman who introduces a serious partner in month 3 has to defend the decision to 5 people at once. A woman who takes a year has already answered the question by the time anybody asks it. By the summer of 2017, they were ready for something larger. They took an extended trip, weeks on the road across Oregon, Washington, and into British Columbia. Small hotels, roadside restaurants, long days of highway. Trips like that are a stress test, and everyone who has taken one knows it. Weeks of forced proximity with no escape hatch, no separate apartments to retreat to, no work to hide inside. A relationship either consolidates or it comes apart, and there is no third option. Theirs consolidated. They came home more committed than they left. The trip also did something practical for them. Long-distance riding requires a level of coordination most couples never have to develop. Packing, route decisions, weather calls, when to stop, where to sleep, what to do when something goes wrong 3 hours from anywhere. Weeks of that produces a working partnership, not just a romance. By the time they got back to Oregon, they had already run a small joint operation together and found out they were good at it. Then came the moment Amy chose to make it public, and she chose the most exposed possible venue for it. October 2017, pumpkin season at Roloff Farms. She was still living on the property. She had not yet sold her share to Matt. The farm during October is not a quiet place. It is tens of thousands of visitors, a full production, her ex-husband running it, her 4 adult children working it, and cameras present. She brought Chris. Think about what that required. She was introducing her new boyfriend to her family, her ex-husband, the LPBW audience, and the entertainment press simultaneously, on ground that belonged to the marriage she had just left. There was no soft launch available. Whatever happened would be seen. She did it anyway, which says something about how sure she already was. The reception told her she had judged it right. Fans who had spent a decade watching the marriage deteriorate on television were, for the most part, glad. There was some grumbling, as there always is, from viewers who had wanted a reconciliation, but the dominant response was relief that she had found somebody, and that response gave the relationship a kind of public license it might otherwise have taken years to earn. Then came December 3rd, 2017. Chris changed his Facebook status to say he was seeing Amy Roloff and added the line people still quote back at him, that the player badge was being retired. It is a small joke and an unimportant sentence, and yet it did real work. A 55-year-old man who is never married, announcing on his own account that the single chapter is closed, is making a public commitment he cannot quietly walk back. Everyone he knows saw it. It is also a slightly odd thing for a man of that age to do, and the oddness is the point. Facebook relationship statuses belong to a younger cohort. A 55-year-old realtor using one is doing something faintly awkward on purpose, in the full knowledge that his friends will notice and comment. He picked the platform where the people who actually knew him were, rather than the one where Amy's audience was. It was aimed at his own circle. He was telling the people who had watched him stay single for 3 decades that this one was different. Then 2018 and 2019 went quiet. Those 2 years contained no headline, no engagement, no announcement, no crisis. Just continued dating, continued travel, continued family events. Chris meeting Amy's children individually. Chris meeting grandchildren as they arrived. Chris turning up at holidays until his presence stopped being remarked on. Nothing happened, and that is the most important part of the whole timeline. 2 years of unremarkable, ordinary life is the real test of a relationship, and it is the one most couples skip. The first year is chemistry and novelty and effort. Year 3 is Tuesday. Amy and Chris spent 2 full years finding out whether they liked each other on Tuesdays before anyone raised the question of marriage. There is a version of this that goes badly, and setting it out makes the achievement visible. Blended situations of this kind usually break in year 2 or 3, once the novelty has burned off and the practical questions arrive. Whose house? Whose holidays? Who gets told first? What happens at the grandchildren's birthdays when the ex-husband is also invited? Those questions do not appear during the romantic phase. They appear during the boring phase. Amy and Chris hit all of them across 2018 and 2019 and worked through them while still only dating, which meant either of them could have walked without a legal process. Nobody walked. The proposal came in September of 2019, the day after Amy's 57th birthday. Dinner at a favorite restaurant, a heart-shaped diamond, one knee, yes. That story has its own weight and its own timing, and it deserves its own telling rather than a paragraph here. The engagement then ran nearly 2 years, which is long by modern American standards. Some of that was deliberate. They wanted to plan properly, and neither of them was in a hurry, having already established that they were not people who hurried. The rest was 2020. COVID arrived and every large gathering in the world was canceled or postponed. Their original target slid into the following year. Matt then did something that surprised a great many viewers, and it is still one of the more decent things he has done on camera. He offered Roloff Farms as the venue. Amy no longer owned any part of that property, having sold her share to him the previous year, and he was under no obligation whatsoever. Offering his ex-wife the property for her second wedding was a gesture with no upside for him, and it was one of the first clear indications that the post-divorce relationship between the two of them was going to end up somewhere healthier than anybody expected in 2016. Saturday, August 28, 2021. Roughly 146 guests gathered at Roloff Farms in Hillsborough, on the property where she had raised 4 children and where the marriage before this one had come apart. Amy wore Sincerity, the Justin Alexander line. Chris wore black. Michael Williams took the service. Her father walked her down the aisle. The music was not from a playlist. Chris's best man, Rick Hinkes, had written an original piece for the occasion called Heart to Heart, and that is what played during the ceremony. Somebody wrote them a song. That is a detail worth keeping. 5 years, near enough to the day, from a painting class where she was paired with a man named Bob. One more thing about that date. August 28, 2021 was a pandemic wedding, which meant it happened at all only because they had waited. Couples who pushed ahead in 2020 got 12 people in a garden and a video link. Amy got 146 people, her father, a barn, and a live song. The delay they resented at the time bought them the wedding they had actually wanted. That is not a lesson anybody can plan for, and it fits the pattern of the whole relationship so neatly that it is almost funny. They have marked every August 28th since. The 4th anniversary in 2025 got a tribute post on her Instagram. The 5th arrives in a few months. There is a detail from the ceremony worth holding on to. Somebody wrote them a song. Rick Hinkes did not send a card or make a toast. He composed an original piece of music for 2 people in their late 50s getting married for the first time and the second time, respectively. That is not an ordinary thing for a best man to do. It is what people do when a wedding actually means something to them, rather than being an obligation on the calendar. That kind of gesture does not appear around relationships nobody believes in. It appears when a man's friends have watched him stay single for 30 years and have concluded that this one is the real thing. What has the marriage actually looked like? Travel, motorcycles, cooking, which is Amy's whole professional identity now, grandchildren, of whom there are 8, family events, including some that took real diplomacy to attend, an ordinary shared life, which is what she said she wanted when she walked into that room in 2016. There is a question worth asking that most retellings avoid, because the answer is not flattering to the format that made her famous. Would any of this have survived being filmed from day one? Some of it was filmed. The pumpkin season debut, the family introductions, the wedding itself all played out for television. But the parts that did the actual work, the road trip through British Columbia, the 2 quiet years, the ordinary Tuesdays, were mostly theirs. Nobody was constructing a storyline out of a relationship that was deliberately refusing to produce events. A production needs an incident. Amy and Chris spent 5 years generating as little of it as possible. Whether that was strategy or temperament, it protected the relationship during exactly the period when it was most fragile. Set the whole arc out and one thing runs through all of it. At every point where the relationship could have accelerated, it did not. The first date could have been dinner and was a motorcycle ride that took months to lead anywhere. The 2017 road trip could have produced a proposal and produced a stronger relationship instead. The 2018 and 2019 stretch could have been compressed into an engagement and was allowed to stay boring. The engagement could have been 6 months and ran nearly 2 years. None of that was indecision. Amy has been perfectly clear that she knew what she wanted. It was two people who had each already lived a full adult life, declining to do the thing that people in new relationships almost always do, which is to mistake certainty for urgency. By August of 2021, there was nothing left to find out. No hidden temperament, no unexamined incompatibility, no discovery waiting on the other side of the wedding. They had already seen each other on the road, at the farm, through a pandemic, through the death of Amy's mother, and across 2 years of nothing happening at all. Most people marry on a hypothesis. These two married on evidence. Whether the model transfers is another question. 5 years is a long time to spend confirming something, and it is easier to spend when both people already have houses, careers, and no biological clock running. A couple in their 20s cannot simply decide to be this patient. But for anyone starting over in their 50s, which is a growing number of people, the arc is worth studying. Amy Roloff went to a painting class not knowing what dating was, got paired with the wrong man, met the right one across the room, and then took half a decade to be sure. She has been married to him since 2021 and shows no sign of regretting a single one of those delays. Do you think the 5-year pace is why this marriage has held up? Would you have made the public debut at pumpkin season, with the cameras and the ex-husband and the whole family watching? And is 2 years of nothing happening actually the best test a relationship can get?